Let's get into it right now. Bring Clint Smith into the show. Kia ora, Clint. Welcome to the show.
G'day, Pat.
G'day, Clint. And you guys know each other from sort of Green Days, back in the Green Day. Huh, didn't do that. Back in the Green Days, a little bit. You've connected?
Yeah, indeed. But online, as most of our relationships have formed in the good old Twitter years, you know?
Yeah.
We used to have quite similar looks. When I had a few less pounds and he had some more hair on his chin, we looked quite similar.
Yeah. But I'm the only one that will be accused by the alt-right tonight of having a neck beard. I don't know what that means and why it's an insult, but just me. So you can feel good about that, Aaron, as well. Clint, before we show this, do you want to just give us a better synopsis of what the BPS actually is and why it comes out before the budget?
Sure. It's kind of the first indicator of what the budget in a given year is going to be like. It usually comes out, like you said, in December of the previous year, and at the same time as a thing called Haifu, the half-year economic and fiscal update. And they usually come out, well, Haifu says this is how the economy is going, this is where we think growth's going. And the budget policy statement, the core thing it says is this is how much extra money we have in the coming year we're planning to be putting into government services or tax cuts. It's a scene setter. It says there's basically this much money in the pot.
Right. And yeah, I'm interested as to why they don't really need to do it. Why do they do it? Because they could just tell us all this on budget day as well.
Yeah, I think I'm pretty sure it's part of the Public Finance Act that it has to be done. It's basically the first thing the finance minister has to produce for that part of the budgetary cycle. Really goes year round in the background with ministers and officials beavering away, and like I say, it usually comes out in December. It didn't, and last time, and it's not actually really because the government was formed late. The governments have been formed late in the year before, and they've usually got the BPS out. But I think we'll come to a discussion of some of the issues that the government's having around the BPS after we've seen the clip, maybe.
We'll do that. Before we do that, Aaron, seeing you were involved in local body politics to the sort of highest degree as the mayor, does this all vibe with you? Do you get a similar sense of doing local body budgetaries? Is that something that's handled by the mayor's office? How does that handle versus what we're going to talk about tonight, which is nationwide?
Well, it's slightly different. I mean, the local council, it's not a perfect analogy, but it's essentially cabinet. Right. So everyone on the council is a decision maker, and you're briefed by staff or somebody working on the budget year round, and then eventually gets spat out as a draft in December, January for sign off, and then is subject to public submissions, which isn't the case in central government. There's no requirement in Wellington to consult on what they are proposing to do. They can just go and do it. It's one of many constraints or obligations that's put on local government that isn't the case in Wellington. But certainly it's a far more transparent and public process, budget setting at a local council level, than it is out of the beehive, for sure.
All right. So let's have a look at the story from One News tonight. We're just going to watch the first part of it. They do it in 3 parts, including different reporters doing different parts. But we'll just watch the first part of it because it gives quite a good synopsis of what we experienced today and what we're going to potentially expect with the upcoming election. So we'll check this out and then we'll come and have a chat about it. Here we go.
Tax cuts are still on the cards for New Zealanders, but they may look different to what was promised before the election. Finance Minister Nicola Willis today unveiled the government's spending priorities for this year's budget in May. They include tax reductions, savings from cost cutting across government departments, new spending on health, education and law and order, and long-term infrastructure investments. But where's the money coming from with the economic outlook weaker than expected? The amount of money allocated to fund new spending will be set at less than $3.5 billion for the May budget.
Can I ask you, Clint, because I'm ignorant to this, is that an average amount, big amount, small amount, if that's the budget, the operating allowance?
It's been running about $3.5 billion. Obviously, COVID has sort of mucked around with that, but 3.5 billion was the plan under the previous Labour government. Yeah.
So that's pretty
So,
standard.
and that was meant to, but it's really just enough to cover inflation.
Gotcha.
Not
Gotcha.
much
So
else.
it'll be going up with inflation, but it hovers around that mark for a while.
Every year the government gets extra money in because of inflation and because of GDP growth, and this is an allocation of that extra money towards new spending or tax cuts. And 3.5 billion is just about enough to cover inflation for education, health, those big major things, plus maybe a few smaller new programs.
And just because I'm being fair and I have my tongue in my cheek slightly, Aaron, like Dunedin City, their budget's around that as well, 3.5 billion. Is that what you kind of operate for? I mean, I before I moved to Dunedin, I heard a lot of complaints about the stadium and stuff. It felt like Dunedin was paying about 3.5 billion a year to operate. Is that about right?
I think the OPEX budget's about 350 million, maybe. And about half of that money half of the revenue is collected through rates. Yeah.
All right. Okay. Well, let's keep going with the story.
Exact number to be revealed on the day. And with the forecast slowdown, pressure on household budgets and rising unemployment, the government's tax take is going to be lower, estimated to be cumulatively down nearly $14 billion in the next 5 financial years. And that means it'll now take longer for the Crown books to get back into surplus. For what it all means for you, our coverage begins with political editor Mikey Sherman.
Sam Summers runs a small business delivering food during the week, but
This is a very good analogy. Sam's also a friend of the show. He watches and communicates with us a few times. This is a great analogy. We've all heard about the block of cheese budgets and those sorts of things. Sam does one stop better than this.
along with today's onions, he also had this interpretation of his government tax cut.
So this is what the tax cuts represents to me.
He ran his salary through National's tax calculator.
For me, it is the equivalent of $2.15 a week or free Chubba Chup lollipops.
He says that sucks and the money for tax cuts should go elsewhere. The Finance Minister, though, is charging ahead.
I know New Zealanders at home are looking to us for certainty that tax relief is coming and it's coming soon because they need it.
The tax cut.
So here's a question for you, Clint, right? You're on the 9th floor, you're talking to the Prime Minister, you're talking with the Finance Minister, and you're selling this idea to the nation that the nation wants this because tax relief is on the way and tax cuts are coming. And then dude's saying, I get $2 a week. You know, how do you square that circle? How can the person making that message be so confident to say New Zealanders want this, New Zealanders need this, here's a gold coin? Like, how do you actually do that when you're sitting behind the scenes advising and writing speeches and stuff?
Well, in Nicola's case, what she did was say you get up to $250 a fortnight, families. And what that turned out was, she was counting fortnights where usually we talk about it in weeks. She's talking households where we usually talk individuals. And she was, this is a once in a blue moon family that they both have to have incomes of $65,000 and be spending $300 a week on ECE, I think it was.
Yeah.
So it turned out that, up to $250 a fortnight was doing a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah, there was
when you
a lot
actually
of
break
heavy
the
lifting.
numbers, when you actually break down the numbers, 40% of taxpayers get the $2.15 that Sam was talking about there, and a quarter get nothing. But but political discourse tends to ignore people on low incomes anyway. So, they say person on the average full-time wage that is, gets $15 or $20 a week. And that gets duly reported, and everyone kind of ignores the fact that most of the population's getting 2 fists of bugger all.
Yeah, the ones who need it the most is the word you're looking for. Need it most, get nothing.
The Chubba Chups are on you.
Chubba Chups are on you. Not to even, I'm sure there was some things sometimes, I don't know if you want to get into the details or not, that you had to kind of square a circle when you were working with Jacinda Ardern. I'm not even sure what there would be, but there's got to be. How do you approach this where you know that you're kind of only giving a half truth? You're making the message more palatable than maybe it is to everybody. I'm just assuming that happens to every political party.
Yeah. It certainly happened with some of the other Labour leaders I worked with. I think, the the best thing always is not to have a crappy policy in the first place. So, sometimes you're not so blessed, and you have to accentuate the positive. You have to be careful in those circumstances not to stretch the bounds of credibility, because then it bounces back on you. And I when I worked for Labour, I made tax calculators like this, and in 2017, I think a couple of other ones as well. And I was always mindful that people could put in any number, and everyone's got to get something, right? So the fact that Nationals put up this calculator and Sam can go in there and go, I get $2, that sucks. Like that kind of says that they haven't really thought through, okay, what else can we say to Sam that we're going to offer him that's good? Maybe they don't have anything to offer him that's good.
Yeah. And we've got some lovely people at the moment. Mr. Arvids has decided to donate his tax cut to BHN with a $2 super chat. I appreciate that, Mr. Arvid. That's very generous of you. And, because you're one of the Kiwis that needs and is looking forward to that tax cut, and you chose to give you $2 to us. We appreciate that. All right, let's hear a bit more from the story.
Will be paid for from the government's operating budget, meaning it won't have to borrow extra.
It's coming, it's going to be responsible, and it's going to be meaningful as we promised you.
But a growing chorus of critics argue now's not the right time.
You're seeing even right-wing economists and commentators saying that their numbers don't add up and that they should be delaying these trickle-down tax cuts.
It's absolutely irresponsible to be providing tax cuts at the moment when the government aren't being honest with New Zealanders about what that means.
In order to help pay for...
Sorry, completely off topic. Was it just me, or was there a dude in a suit with dope leaves going up the suit behind him? just kind of noticed that last minute. Didn't notice it beforehand. That's the new version of the hemp suit that Nandor used to wear, going up behind him with his dope suit on.
Tax cuts at the moment when the government aren't being honest with New Zealanders about...
It's a whole new version of that's a dope suit, man. See what I did there?
What that means.
In order to help pay for tax cuts, the government signalled savings elsewhere, scrapping free public transport for young people, public service jobs, free ECE for 2-year-olds and free prescriptions, to name a few. The minister says health, education and law and order will get more funding in the May budget, but money for anything else will be tight.
Is it irresponsible of you to bring in tax cuts now?
No, it is the most responsible thing we can do.
Young public servant Morgan Kemp originally wanted a tax cut, but today's economic figures changed his mind.
When we're in a situation like we're in now, I just don't see how that's at all possible.
He's baffled the government's pushing ahead.
I think National actually risks losing its brand of fiscal responsibility if it decides to step down on this rate.
Tell you what, in this job, I expect to get criticism. That's okay, because my job is actually to deliver to the New Zealanders that are depending on us to run this economy well. My job is to keep our commitment to them, to give them tax relief.
Tax relief which is on its way come hell or high water.
All right, Mike.
All right, here's a question for both of you, and we'll start with you, Aaron. We've got the whole story there. Mikey Sherman asked, is it irresponsible? Nicola Willis said it's the most responsible thing we can do. That's kind of either end of that story. Is it irresponsible? No, it's the most. Where would you put it on that continuum between irresponsible and it's actually the most responsible thing we're doing right now?
It's certainly hard to see how, if their stated objective is making life easier for people who are struggling, and that's the narrative, right? So New Zealanders need tax relief. We need to be relieved of our obligations because, rent's too high and food's too expensive and so on and so on. It stretches the credulity to breaking point that scrapping free prescriptions and making, doubling the cost of sending your kids to school on the bus if they have to take public transport to school, and scrapping commitments around early childhood education to fund, and the fact that it's mostly being funneled through to landlords is a narrative nightmare. Because people can see that they are being shortchanged by the decisions the government has made to give their landlord, and for increasing numbers of families who are living in rental accommodation in particular, they are seeing money being taken out of their pocket and given to their landlord, and it's hard to see how anybody could frame that as the most responsible thing our government could be doing.
Clint, what are your thoughts?
On the balance, this is a good option, like the most responsible thing we should be doing.
Like there could be nothing more, there could not be 1 millimeter more of things I could do to make it even better than it is. Clint?
Yeah, I mean, look, I agree that the fact that they are having to increase charges to people to pay for tax cuts, it's how can that be responsible? And especially where those charges fall kind of comes down to, kind of the luck of the draw. Does your kid take the bus to school? Do you have illnesses that you need prescriptions for? Those kind of things. But the money in the tax cuts is very, very targeted at upper and middle incomes, and so I mean, again, right? Like it's going to be those on lower incomes who are going to find themselves facing higher charges and lower government subsidies for the costs that they face in their life, and also that people who are already on $70K a year get $20 a week, which they won't notice because it's like 50 cents an hour.
And if Sam, who had the Chupa Chop example, comes along and saves us $2.50, but he happens to have 2 or 3 kids going to school taking the bus, he's actually down 20, 30, $40 a week from the bus travel, but he'll get $2.50 a week back. So this government will say, promise succeed. It's exactly the promise we said, although technically he's worse off by multiples of 10 per week because of the other changes they've made.
And his minimum wage hasn't kept up with inflation.
Yeah. Aaron?
And none of this is a surprise. I mean, I'm sure Craig Rennie doesn't enjoy being the rightest man on the left, but all of this was spelled out by the CTU in particular before the election. People went in and voted eyes wide open as to how wildly improbable. Mike Riddell, for God's sake, coming out and saying this isn't going to work the way that you say it's going to work. And sure enough, it isn't working the way that they said it's going to work. And I think people are cottoning on to the fact that they couldn't find a talking head, a vox pop for that story saying this is a good idea. Tells you, and they certainly would have tried, it tells you everything you need to know, I think.
That's a very good measure, actually, Aaron, because not only would they have tried, if we've actually heard complaints from Winston Peters, maybe David Seymour, they're the same person, before saying we gave the press our contacts and they chose to go. So if the government had people to go to say go and tell, they would have also let the press. So if the press couldn't find someone and the government couldn't say there's someone, then that's actually quite a good yardstick. The other obvious question is, we heard there's going to be $13.9 billion less income for the government over the next 5 years. If you work that out, that's about $2.8 billion per year. Can someone remind me how much they're giving back to landlords? Was that was $2.9 billion per year? So the revenue's going down by $2.8 billion, and they're giving back $2.9 billion. Perhaps that's one of the reasons many economists are saying this is the wrong time, because we don't have to be in deficit. You just have to not give those tax breaks back. Would that be fair, Clint?
Yeah. Look, they've put themselves in a really real bind with these landlord tax cuts. The law for them passed today. So they didn't do it as part of the budget. They decided to do it early so they could give them the tax cuts from April 1. And by taking on this enormous cost for the landlord tax cuts, they've reduced the amount of we call fiscal headroom, the amount of money sloshing around that they have to play with. And they've committed to keeping up, core public services with inflation, health and education. They've committed to these tax cuts, and it doesn't add up. And so that's why they're searching around for cuts. And you're starting to see that they're starting to do things that are politically not tenable. That those disability cuts that were announced last week, what that was the ministry had announced a new way of helping out people who need some respite and some assistance with their disabled kids. It went over budget, but new programs go over budget, and the minister goes cap in hand to the finance minister, goes, look, very sorry, this is more expensive than planned, but we'll sort that out for next year, but can we have some money to tide over for the rest of the year. Nicola Willis got that memo, and rather than address it as a matter of urgency, she put it into the budget pile. And before she knew it, Penny Simmons was out there saying no more money for disabled families. And so this is, why is there no money? It's because they've stretched themselves too thin with these tax cuts.
What do you make of the theory, though, Clint, that it's the public service laying out landmines for the government? The idea that because they're being asked to cut so much from their operating budgets, they're just throwing wildly unpalatable things in kind of retribution, knowing that once they get, that example has, once they get an airing, they'll get fixed.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't not believe that the public service is capable of thinking that through and saying, if we've been asked to make deep cuts, we're going to show that it's not as easy as you might think. So yeah, as mayor, you would have helped put together budgets and been in the same situation with officials suggesting things that might have been politically untenable, but they would have said, well, if you want to cut the money, cut this, I'm sure.
The other question to ask, and it sort of bounces off the back of budgets, and we're going to keep saying this all the way through the year when people like David Seymour saying, we just can't afford this, we just can't afford this. The money's not there to afford it. It's not the case. It's that they're choosing not to pay for it. They're making choices to give money back to landlords and not pay for things. So, the lunch in schools is a perfect example. They can easily afford that. 300 million a year, whatever it was, they're giving back 2.9 billion. And now we're also hearing, and I'm interested in your guys' take on this, about the new way that ECE centres are going to get funding to their parents to pay for ECE by 400,000 invoices going into IRD at a time where the government is telling IRD to cut back. But they're going to need a whole new workload to cover these 400,000 invoices to then rebate them to the parents 4 times a year. Oh no, that's 400,000. That's because it's 100,000 families, so 400,000 in the year. And it feels like they've got to a point already where we've gone, I don't really care if this looks stupid. We're just doing what we want to do.
That is the most cynical thing I've heard. Not from you, from the government, actually. That is the ECE stuff. Like, you couldn't, if someone asked you to design a funding mechanism that was less likely to be taken up by people who were entitled to it and needed it, you couldn't do a better job than this. I mean, please pay in advance for 3 months and then file your accounts with the IRD and then wait for your. I mean, who's got the money to do that? When you're covering your expenses on a week-to-week basis, you don't. It's like the old arguments people would have about electric cars, and they'd say, "Oh, it pays for itself over time." Well, it doesn't, but that doesn't pay for it, does it? So the idea that everyone's going to have the money to spend on early childhood to then get rebated by the IRD. I mean, people just aren't going to bother, or they're going to more likely bow out of early childhood because they don't have the cash on a week-to-week basis to cover it. And trying to sell that as a support mechanism for families is wild to me.
Yeah.
Oh, and who does have the money up front and who will take the time because they'll get the most back is the people on high incomes who are already spending the most on childcare. The average family that has spending on childcare, which is about, I think, half of families with kids in the age range. The average family only spends $80 a week. So under this policy, they'll get $20 back when they have, give their invoice in eventually. But there are 20,000 families who are spending $300 or more a week. They're the ones that get $75 a week. And they're the what, they're obviously got decent incomes already if they're spending $300 a week on childcare. So again, it's a policy that favors those who are well off and who know how these systems operate, who have the familiarity with government to do those things. And like you say, Pat, like when that cost of living payment came in, IRD had to hire several hundred people to deal with those cost of living payments, and that wasn't going through receipts and adding it all up. This will be a monstrous task.
What can we expect to see in the budget that we don't know about today, Clint?
I think there's going to be some kind of surprise in terms of new revenue, as the government is sort of bloodlessly referring it to, because
you mean more levies, but no taxes, that sort of thing.
Yeah, there's no new tax, they've said, but a levy is technically not a tax, and the government charges things as well, and it also can impose co-payments. So, for example, we're expecting the prescription charges to come back. Nobody says there has to be only $5 though. What if it was $10 or $15? That would raise more revenue for the government. As it stands, it doesn't add up for them, and I think that if they cut back on the tax cuts or spread them out over time, that would make a joke of them. Oh, I'm going to get my $2 a week in installments over 3 years. So that doesn't work. So they're going to have to find new revenue and deeper cuts to make it balance. And it'll be something we don't expect. Like, I don't think anyone was thinking that Simeon Brown was going to increase regos by $50 a year. That kind of came out of left field as well. So it'll be something like that.
I saw some other commentary. It might have been News Hub today. There might have even been one, but further down that story that we didn't watch, who basically also said the reason that this early look and these hints towards the budget is a bit loosey-goosey is they still don't know themselves yet, because they're still chasing where that money is going to come from. And so it feels a bit looser than your normal December release has been. Aaron, you thinking anything?
Yeah, but also they didn't do the work in the lead up to the election. I mean, their entire policy platform since October has been stopping things and repealing things. And they haven't done the policy development work that they could get, which is why you don't see something like this happening in December, because in December they would have had no idea what the situation was going to be. And I think the lightweight nature of the policy program is becoming more and more evident.
All right.
And I think there's a real I was just going to say, I think there's a real conflict between the parties over this. That speech that Winston Peters gave a couple of weeks ago, where he overshadowed what he was actually trying to say by talking about Nazi Germany. What he was actually doing was giving a signal to his coalition partners that he wasn't prepared to give way on his values and his priorities in the budget. So that tells you that behind closed doors, they're sitting down and going, we're going to have to do spending cuts or we're going to have to cut back on things that Winston Peters won't agree to. And so I think that's one reason that I think actually is the reason why we still don't have an operating allowance, is that the parties between themselves cannot agree.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Clint, thanks so much for joining us tonight for a little bit to talk about stuff that I know nothing about. So it's good to have you on board and give us your experience. We appreciate that. And we'll look forward to seeing, it feels a bit like a guessing game of whose magic 8 ball was correct when it comes to actual budget time and what is in and what is out. Maybe we'll get something really unexpected, like banning smoking again. I don't know. Maybe they'll enforce smoking. They'll make everyone start smoking, and then they'll get their tax take that way. Maybe that's the next step from here on in, Clint.
There we go. It could be it.
All right, dude. All the best. Thank you, sir.
Cheers, mate.